My name is Gregory Proctor. I'm a multiple myeloma survivor. I was diagnosed in July of 2021. I received 3 months of treatment prior to achieving remission in October of 2021. Once we got to remission, the first thing that came to our mind, along with my doctors, was we have to start preparing you for stem cell transplant. It was all a matter of timing. And so between October and December, we were still in the throes of dealing with the financial components that were going on, as well as trying to figure out if we had reached our ceiling, what was our insurance company actually going to cover, with regards to our stem cell transplant. But luckily, with the VA being there, it was a blessing for us to kind of move forward. I checked into the hospital on February 8th, where I was administered the melphalan. February 9th is when my transplant actually occurred. I stayed in the hospital for approximately 11 days, was released from the hospital on or about the 20th or 21st, came home for 14 hours, spiked a tremendously high fever, which my wife said she could not even read on a thermometer, rushed back to the hospital, ran through excruciating series of tests to look at bacterial, viral, you name it, all different types of infections. And the conclusion was roughly on the 8th consecutive day that I was in the hospital, they chalked it up to be engraftment syndrome. And that in itself was very scary. We knew I still was dealing with a lot of ailments and concerns and aches because of how much damage the disease had already done to, my skeletal structure. And, one of the things that really was most concerning was just trying to fathom, do I have the strength mentally and physically to get through this process, which we all knew was very arduous. We didn't know much about it at the time, but we knew it was very harsh on the body to be able to get through that process. And so we did the same thing that we did with trying to understand the disease and the characteristics of the disease within the first 3 months, was pouring our energy and time into finding out possibly everything that we could dealing with the stem cell transplant and where would be the best location for us to basically get the stem cell transplant done. And it wasn't until about October that we said to ourselves, we've got to get a multiple myeloma specialist. And so we contacted our insurance company. Our insurance company said, okay, you guys can utilize within the network and it wouldn't cost us very much. So we ended up at Dana-Farber. So at the time that I had received news that I was in remission, we were in Boston and we were at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And at that point, we were starting to inquire about the stem cell transplant, because up until that point in time, we were a little bit oblivious to trying to even put our energy or focus on the stem cell transplant, because we knew that I needed to be in remission in order for the stem cell transplant to be successful the way that we wanted it to be successful. And so we spoke with Dana-Farber. They started getting us into the system and running through all of their processes and procedure. Well, for us, it was kind of funny because, through all the workups, the stem cell collection and everything that you go through for all the preparatory aspects of it, we kept talking with the doctor saying, okay, you guys collected 8 million stem cells from me. How many stem cells are we going to put back into me? The nurse practitioner that was administering the stem cells said, Mr. Proctor, we're going to put 4 million stem cells back into you. And so my wife and I kind of looked at each other and we said, well, is that too much? Not really knowing the overall complications of what was going to happen. But, we were told 2.5, we were told no more than 3. And of course, you're putting in another million. What is that going to do to me? And I think overall, after going through it, it really helped me recover. Initially, you hear a lot of bad things with regards to dealing with the stem cell transplant. Of course, your doctors are always trying to prep you and ensuring that, not only do you have the mental fortitude, but also the physical, physicality to be able to get through it. And so I had gone from approximately 185 pounds to about 225 pounds in weight, which was very concerning to me because I'd never been that heavy before. but I certainly knew the reason why, because once I was admitted into the hospital and started the melphalan with the 24-hour rest period, and then, of course, injecting the stem cells. I did not want to eat. I had no appetite, no strength, was very, very weak, really didn't know kind of what was going on with my body. I felt like my mind was still intact, but my body was kind of doing something of its own. And to me, that was very scary and very fearful, just based on the fact that psychologically, you feel as if you're in control, but really you're kind of not. And I went through the first 3 or 4 days very lethargic, tired, sleepy, and just kind of somewhat coherent, but not quite as coherent as I needed to be. And then I hit the period of the bottom, which is very well known, is where, at that point, your body is at the lowest point of its immunity, and you begin to start to rebuild. And so for me is where I started to feel just the sickness and the ailments of the stem cells trying to reimpregnate themselves back into my bone marrow. And I went through just a cycle of a lot of vomiting, a lot of nausea, not much fever, because they had me on extremely, a lot of medications. But certainly it was an experience that I can only describe as riding a roller coaster at full speed, and you're coming off of the steepest fall that you could possibly imagine. And then on the upswing of it, having your head thrown back as if you're catching, a tremendous amount of G-force, and you're just trying to hold on for dear life as you're trying to peak. And to me, that's kind of what that 11 days was like. And so for me, it was a constant battle of, as I would call it, tennis, in dealing with, okay, this is what happened, and here's the result of that. And so we're going to give you this, and okay, this happened based on the result of that. And so it was kind of this wishy-washy circumstance of, as I call it, tennis back and forth. And for me, psychologically, it played havoc on me, because, I've never been an individual that had to go through any type of major surgeries or deal with an excruciating amount of major medication. And so I was having a hard time trying to cope with it. And even very early on in my initial diagnosis, my doctor had said to me, she's like, you won't get a medal for how much pain you can tolerate. And those were the things that I was battling with psychologically and emotionally, through my own mental perseverance through this whole ordeal. The roller coaster ride that I had to deal with was just horrible. I mean, that was something that, spiking the fever, having the engraftment syndrome, running all these tests, everything coming back inconclusive. You don't have an immune system. You're praying to, the good Lord above every single day, saying, please don't let me die, because no one's bringing you any answers. And when no one's bringing you any answers that you can wrap your mind around, all logical premises or notions go out the door. I even had so many doctors coming in, checking on me all the time, because everybody was puzzled as to what was actually happening. And so my private transplant doctor and the hospital doctor, they were at odds with each other. And so you could see the friction and intensity building up between the two of them, because one saying, well, we may have to give him a blood transfusion, if we can't get his fever down, and this, that, and the other, and all these other things. My wife and I were going, okay, you know what? We really don't want a blood transfusion, because if my counts are where they need to be, let's not talk about blood transfusion, and let's just kind of focus in on dealing with what we know, which at the time we didn't know anything that can resolve this. So they kept me on a slow drip for 8 days to keep my fever under control. And then finally, around the 7th day, they came in and they said, we believe this is engraftment syndrome. And, we're hoping that, this will kind of run its course, considering that we were now approaching day 21, in the whole process of this, that if my fever maintained what they would consider to be a normal level, without having to have, whatever they were giving me for the general drugs to keep my fever under control, then they would release me. And that's really how the message came across. I mean, it was like, we don't have anything for you. I mean, we don't. And for my wife and I, that was very scary because my body's still weak. I'm still very fragile. I still, feel as if, of course, you're not yourself. So I get home and we're in the month of March, I believe. And only thing I want to do is sleep. I'm having to force myself to eat. I'm forcing myself to drink, and rest. And my doctors had started to tell me as they were calling and checking in on me, Mr. Proctor, the more you can exercise, it's going to help your stem cells rebuild and, kind of help things, the process move forward. And so we went from walking 15 miles in 1 month to averaging somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 to 12 miles per week in the month of April. And then by the time we got to the month of May, which was encroaching upon my 100-day plus 100-day cycle, we were up to about 25, 30 miles a week. And, I can only thank, my wife, and all of my family that was helping us with all the research and the fruits and vegetables and every other thing that was going on to try and help me, rebuild as fast as I did to regain the strength, not only through medicine, but through nourishment. And I think those two combinations of things were really kind of the instrumental aspects of impact that added value for my expedient recovery, because we went from 0 to 100 in less than 90 days. So at the 100-day marker, they wanted to go back in and do another bone marrow biopsy, which at this point in time, it was going to be bone marrow biopsy number 4 for me. From the time I was diagnosed to May of 2022, it's going to be bone marrow number 4. So we did the bone marrow biopsy plus the MRD test, PET scans, bone density scans, everything across the board, blood work, workup, so forth and so on, just so that we could have a solid, affirmation of a baseline that says, okay, this is where you are based on going through the premises of the stem cell transplant. And knock on wood, for me, I'm still maintaining MRD negative, 0 cancer detection of cells in my body per, however many millions of cells that they look at, and I can only thank, not only my team of doctors, but the good Lord above that these things have continued to persist the way that they have. And of course, it's been a lot of my own work as well, eating healthy, exercising, and the regimen that I stayed tried and true to, from the time that I was diagnosed. Well, my recommendation for any patient that's going to have a bone marrow biopsy, irregardless of what your doctor says, is to do it under sedation. If your tolerance for pain is high, you have a very high threshold for pain, I would still say do it under sedation. I did 2 unsedated, only with local anesthesia, and I would not recommend that to anyone. And of course, the last 2 that I did, they were under sedation and done in a hospital, completed in a hospital. And for me, the recovery was so much better for me to go through that process. And I think the second thing, well, there's quite a few things I'd like to say, is appreciate every moment. Life is extremely, extremely precious. When you dealt with the diagnosis, you think that your life is what I would say coming to an end. And you just have to realize that even though you've been diagnosed with cancer, it's not the end of your journey, regardless of what your conditional strength or state is, because one of the things that we're known for is being warriors. And so in order to be, a bona fide true warrior in dealing with cancer, you have to have the fortitude and the mental capacity to be able to see the other side. Spending time with loved ones and having that affirmation of positivity around you all the time. You're dealing with so many things that are coming at you at once, whether it's financial toxicity, whether it's insurance, whether it's, medications, treatment routines, going to this scan, going to that scan. You don't really control your life very much. And so when you have that quality of time with your loved ones, make sure you definitely embrace that to the fullest. And the last thing is don't take anything for granted, because if you absolutely get to the other side, you make it through the rebirth process, is ensure that you live life to the fullest.